All right, guys, so I am back going through three more teams' 2024 college football schedule previews. This time we're talking about new Big Ten members. It is USC, it's Oregon, and it is Washington just recently losing their head coach, losing a lot of their roster. We will go through these three schedules beginning with USC. Now, USC begins with a neutral site game in Las Vegas against LSU. That could be a very evenly matched game as both teams will be starting new quarterbacks. USC, you would figure Miller Moss, after having the breakout bowl game, would be the starter, and USC putting a heavy emphasis on defensive improvement, firing Alex Grinch towards the end of this past year. We'll see if they can pull it off. They get Utah State in week 2. You would think that LSU game, again, I would say maybe a pick'em. Certainly, you could argue LSU should be the favorites, but they are losing a lot themselves. Then they get their first bye week after Utah State. Utah State at home, very easy win you would expect. And then they go to Michigan. Obviously, Michigan winning the national title going to be tough, but if they lose Jim Harbaugh, if they lose J.J. McCarthy, you could be looking at a Miller Moss breakout game there. Either way, Michigan should have a very good defense returning. That's going to be a tough game on the road, probably at night, although we'll see. They get Wisconsin at home, very winnable game at Minnesota. So you got to like that if you're USC, traveling to Minnesota, but in early October, not in late November. Very winnable game there. They get Penn State at home. That'll be very fun. A lot of fun matchups, a lot of different matchups for USC, obviously, joining an entirely different type of conference, especially considering the locations. But getting Penn State at home, that'll be a good one. You would figure it would be a very even matchup. Both of those teams really good. At Maryland, you would think very winnable game there. You get Rutgers at home. That's a crazy game. Rutgers traveling to the Coliseum, and it's an in-conference game right before Halloween. It's just crazy, man. But yeah, that's happening, and I would expect USC, obviously, to very easily win that game. At Washington, it's tough. It's tough, but with what Washington loses, we could be looking at a TCU 2.0 situation where Washington might go 5-7 this next year. They are losing a ton. They have a very brutal schedule compared to the Pac-12 schedule. It's going to be tough for Washington, and then they get a bye week. They get Nebraska at home. Then they're at UCLA, and then they host Notre Dame. So a very hard non-conference schedule for USC. You're talking about both Notre Dame and LSU. When you go in conference, the brutal game would be at Michigan, although you could make an argument Michigan possibly losing their head coach, their starting quarterback. You get Penn State at home. You don't have to face Ohio State. You could make an argument that this is a schedule that USC could take advantage of and possibly make the 12-team playoff, depending on how improved their defense is. Next, we are going to be looking at Oregon's schedule now. Oregon right now is kind of the co-favorite, I would say, for the Big Ten. It's kind of Oregon, Ohio State, and Michigan, depending on what happens with Michigan as the favorites in the Big Ten in 2024. They will be starting very likely Dylan Gabriel with Dante Moore as the backup. And there was a scheduling quirk with Oregon where I thought they were supposed to play in week 0 against Hawaii, but apparently that's not happening. There was the whole thing where they were going to play an extra game, but I don't know. Either way, they will be starting off when everyone else starts off on August 31st against Idaho, so that'll be a very easy win against the FCS team. Then they get Boise State. That could be a sneaky game, but they are at home. I like what Boise State is doing, but you would figure being at home should be a relatively comfortable second half victory for Oregon. Boise State did lose like 5 or 6 games this past year at Oregon State. So Oregon State, there it is, the Civil War in week 3. You would figure Oregon State losing both of their quarterbacks, losing their head coach. Relatively easy game for Oregon. That'll be weird, though, that game happening very early in the season. They get their first bye week, and then they're at UCLA. You would figure that should be another win there. Michigan State at home, another very winnable game. And then you get Ohio State at home. That is the massive heavyweight battle, and if you are Oregon, you have to like that you're hosting the Buckeyes. You go on the road to Purdue. Very winnable game there. Illinois at home. That's another very winnable game. At Michigan is going to be tough. That's going to be a tough game, but again, Michigan, we don't know what they're going to be in 2024. Maryland at home, that should be a win. At Wisconsin, that could be annoying, especially considering the weather there in November, possibly sub 30-degree weather. We will see. And then they get an off week right before. That's a really late bye week on the 23rd of November. And then they host Washington. Again, I don't expect Washington to be very good in 2024. To put that game into context, Washington might have 6 losses going into that last game. So we look at it right now and we say, Washington, they just made the national title. That's going to be a huge game to end the season. I really don't think so. This is a very manageable schedule for Oregon, especially if they can beat or at least go 1-1 against Ohio State and Michigan. As long as you do that, all of the other games, Boise State could be kind of challenging, but it's at home. Oregon State on the road. It's an annoying rivalry, but they lost everyone. UCLA, very winnable. MSU win. At Purdue should be a win. Illinois at home. Maryland at home. At Wisconsin. These are very winnable games for Oregon. A lot of these teams with the realignment are going to face much tougher schedules. That's exactly why we need the expanded 12-team playoff, because you're going to have, if we still had the 14 playoff, you would have significant schedule imbalances to where you'd have Big Ten teams with 2 losses that are more deserving than, ACC teams with 0 losses or 1 loss, just because the schedule is so much harder within the Big Ten, with USC, with Washington, with Oregon joining the conference. Remember, that national title, if you want to focus on next year, that was an all Big Ten matchup of Washington versus Michigan. So Oregon, they can lose 2 games. They'll be completely fine in terms of making the playoff. But right now, it is, you look at the Big Ten championship, a lot of people talking about possibly Oregon facing Ohio State in that game. But that is just their schedule. And then the final team we're looking at, it is Washington. So Washington, like I said, losing DeBoer, their head coach, losing Penix Jr., the starting quarterback, losing their top 2 receivers, actually their top 3 receivers, I believe, losing their starting running back, Dylan Johnson. They are suffering from a lot of attrition. We will see. They begin on August 31st against Weber State, the FCS team. That should be an easy win. They face Eastern Michigan in week 2. They should start off 2-0. You get Washington State, the Apple Cup, in week 3, a rivalry game there. That's going to be, that's at Lumen Field. That'll be fun, little neutral site game, but you would figure 3-0 start. They get Northwestern week 4. All right, so this is a very easy early schedule. You're looking at 4-0 at Rutgers week 5, another very winnable game. So possibly 5. I mean, that is a very easy schedule. Then you're talking about Michigan at home. That's going to be tough. That'll be the rematch of the national championship. At Iowa is not going to be easy. It's never easy to go to Iowa. We would expect Iowa to have an improved offense. Then again, we say that every year, but at least this next year, they're finally going to have a new offensive coordinator. They don't get their bye weeks until late in the season. Their first bye week coming the 19th of October. Then they're at Indiana. That's another very winnable game. Seems their schedule's backloaded here because they get USC at home. Then they're at Penn State, UCLA at home, another bye week, and then they're at Oregon. So Washington, I would actually expect them to start off very well. The early part of their schedule is very easy. They've got a terrible non-conference schedule again. And you would figure, I don't want to guarantee a 5-0 start because maybe Rutgers is improved next year, but 5 very manageable games going into that game hosting Michigan. And then after that, the wheels really could fall off for them if they lose to Michigan, then lose on the road at Iowa. You would think they would beat Indiana on the road, but then you have USC at Penn State and then at Oregon along with versus UCLA. So, early in the season, it's very manageable for Washington. Late in the season, I think it gets really tough. I would expect Washington with this schedule probably to be around 8-4, maybe if things go bad, 7-5. But yeah, they should start off at least 4-1, maybe 5-0 going into that Michigan game overall. But no, I mean, in looking at their schedule, this is the first time I'm actually seeing it. It is relatively easy compared to the other 2 teams, especially with USC having that brutal non-conference schedule facing both Notre Dame and LSU. They are home against Notre Dame, but they have that neutral site game against LSU. And then also USC, you're on the road at Michigan, you get Penn State, you're at Washington. It is a little tough. As for Oregon, they've got Ohio State. That's the brutal part. Actually, they have both Ohio State and Michigan, also at Wisconsin. But either way, guys, those are 3 more teams' schedule previews. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.